Hey, welcome to this video. In this video we will be having a look at all the curve nodes in the geometry nodes editor in Blender 3.0. But at first, do you know that I have created a big material pack? You can find it on Gumroad, the link is in the description. The material pack are up to 260 materials and there's also a free version, so grab that if you want to. And then you can get all those great materials and you can just drag them into your scene and you don't have to create them. Go and download the free version, or you can collect all the 260 materials and the advanced version. And then let's go back to our geometry nodes. So here we are in Blender 3.0 and you can just drag that window up. And we can then go into the geometry nodes editor. Here we can then click on new to create a new node tree. If you want to know the basics of geometry nodes, I have also a video about that. You can watch that if you want. It is on the top right eye. We can add a node if we would click Shift and A, or if we would go here on the top, add, and then take a node and just drag them into here. But I will be using the shortcut. And today we will be having a look at all those nodes, which are a lot. And I think maybe these nodes, but those are more important, so those are only the shapes. I mean, you can use them and play around on your own. They're not very complicated, just playing around. But today we will be having a look at the curve manipulation nodes. At first I want to delete everything and I want to add in the viewport a simple Bezier curve. Because we can also add a geometry node tree on a curve. And on this curve I can show the curve manipulation nodes better. And then I will be simultaneously opening the spreadsheet so we can have some looks at the data. And the first node is, so remembering Shift A, and then you can go here on the curve submenu. So the curve submenu, there are all the nodes that manipulate your curve in a certain way. Then the curve primitives are new curves that you can add to your scene. So curve, and the first is the curve length node. You can drag it in here. You can drag it into here because it outputs a float, so that's a number. So if we want to see our curve again, so this doesn't work because it's red, we can do like this, and this node just outputs us the curve length. We can preview it with the viewer. You can add it with Control Shift and then right click, and then we have attached our value and we want to have it on our curve. So just connect it like that, and now we can preview our data that's coming out of our curve length in our spreadsheet. And right now we can't see much because we have only 2 control points, and this is because if you would switch into edit mode, here on the top, object mode, edit mode, or just tab, we can see we have only 2 control points as they are called here in the spreadsheet. And here we can see here is the length. So what is a control point and what is a spline? So we can have, you can extrude this by pressing E, and then you can craft something like that maybe. Now we have 6 control points and those are our handles here. So our points to control our curve, those are 6. And then we have a spline, that is the whole wire. So if we would, but a spline is not a curve. So if we would duplicate this, then we would have 2 splines. So here two wires that are not attached to each other, but we have still one curve. So this is the difference. So I will just delete this because I don't need it. Maybe you need it, but I don't. So now this node outputs us here in the viewer the length of our whole spline. And those length is also stored on every control point. So if we would drag now a control point, you can see our length is decreasing. So this is just the basic length of our curve. So how can we maybe make funny things with this? I just delete the viewer. We can grab a set position node. So we've covered those nodes before. You can watch the previous episodes where I explain every single node in geometry nodes. We've covered the other nodes before. We can just take our length and plug it into the offset. Now this thing is going like crazy. And I want to have a math node set to sine to make it wiggle a little bit. And now if we would change this, this would wiggle around like this. It's not a very useful use case, but maybe you get the point. So if we would use the viewer here, you can see our value is a perfect sine. Let's delete everything. Let's connect this back. And the next node is the curve to mesh node. And this is a very interesting node because if you would have nodes that would manipulate your mesh, like the mesh to points node, and we would drag this onto here, it gives us a warning. Input geometry has unsupported type curve. So we have to convert it to a mesh. So we can drag that in here, and you can see it here. It inputs a curve here, and the output is a mesh. We can drag that onto here, and nothing changed because it was perfectly converted. And now we can use other nodes that manipulate meshes. We can use them now on here. And this node has another cool side effect because it has a profile curve. And this gives us a way to use another curve primitive to define the shape that gets wrapped around our curve. So let me show you. In the curve primitives, we have the curve circle. And if we would preview this, it's just a basic circle. And if we would use that circle now on our mesh, you can see that looks hilarious, but that's because our radius is way too big. And now you can see it uses this circle. Let me join our curve back in so you can see. So here was our curve and wraps the circle around our curve like this. And with this, you can make curves visible in the viewport or in rendered mode. And you can define the resolution of it. So if the shading looks a little bit weird, it's because it is smooth shaded. So you can use in the mesh the set shade smooth. And what? Yes, we have joined it with the curve. So let's just not do that. And you can uncheck set curve, set shade smooth, but it's better when it's shaded smooth if you have enough resolution. And if you don't want to have these caps here, you can just click fill caps, and now it's perfectly filled up. So you can make quick wires with that. And if you want to have other cool effects, we have also a star here, profile curve, and this looks crazy. You can just drag it down like this, and you have now wrapped a star around this. like this. Nice. So here you can do everything you want, or you can also just take a curved line and just use a line on this. Everything's possible. The next node is the curve to points node, and this node just does what it is named. It just converts our curve to points. So those points are very big, so we have to scale them down. So we go to points and set point radius and just scale them down. And now we can define how much points we want to have on this curve, and we can even define what length we want to have on them. So here you can see, if I would drag this, the count of our points will be always the same. It will always be 36. But if I would change it to length now, all the points will have always the same length from each other. So now if I would drag this, nothing will change because they will remain on their position. I mean, flickers a little bit, but that's because of little inconsistencies. This is the main thing you have to know about this node. I don't want to explain everything because, as you can see, are a lot of nodes. Oh, the next node is very interesting. We have the fill curve node. And this is very interesting because with that you can fill the inside of our curve with a face. So here you can see it automatically converts our curve to a mesh because it will set a face. It tries to set a face inside of our curve. So if we would drag this onto here, you can see this is now a face, and we can decide. So let me turn on wireframe if we can see this. So it tries to replicate this with triangles. It's maybe a little bit faster, or you can choose an n-gon. It's up to your own. Maybe what works sometimes a little bit better, like this. And with this you can then do crazy shapes maybe. In my fractals tutorial, I used that for a very interesting effect. So there I made fractals with this effect. You can watch that if you want. And then we have the fillet curve node. And this node just is like the bevel node, but for curves. So it rounds your edges. It doesn't work that well on that curve because it is completely round, but you can see here. So what this node does, you have your points here and they are Bezier curves. So you can change the handle type by right clicking and then set handle type to vector is the sharp one, like this. And then you can see here what this fillet curve node does. It rounds your edges, and it has to convert your Bezier curves automatically to vector curves. Otherwise, this node doesn't have edges. As you can see here, where it flickers, those are Bezier curves. And then you can round your edges, and you can overdo it. And with this, you can also make great effect. You can limit the radius. You don't want to have this crazy effect like here. And if you want to have a certain amount of roundness, then you can use the poly mode. And here you have also limit radius and that kind of stuff. So the fillet curve bevel node for curves. Then we have the resample curve node, and this is similar like the subdivision surface for meshes. This just gives your curve a certain number of points. So if we would drag this onto here, this curve now has 10 points, and like in the curve to points node before, we have also the length. This now has always points that have this distance, and if we would have it to count, we have always only 10 points, as you can see here. And we can drag that up or lower the subdivisions of our curve, or as said, the sample count. The next node is the reverse curve node, and this node is very sneaky because you don't see any difference if I would mute it or not. And this is because it reverses all the points in your curve but doesn't affect the locations. So if we would take our viewer again and we would go into in our control points, here we can see, if I would mute this, here at the top we have the last point has a position here of 1.886, and if we would not reverse our curve, this would be the first point. So you can see it here that it is reversed. Otherwise you can't see any difference. The next node is the sample curve node. So the sample curve node picks a certain point on your curve and it outputs those information on that position of your curve. For example, let me show you. We will plug in our curve here, and then we have a factor. So at 0, it will be here on the start, the first point. It would output the position, the tangent, or the normal of the first point, and then 0.5, the middle point, and 1, the last point. And we can see what it outputs if we would use a mesh primitive, an icosphere, drag it in here. If we would use that icosphere and we would change the position of the icosphere, and we would use the position of our defined point on our curve on our icosphere, we can see if we would join them together. So we can see the curve again. We can see if we would drag the slider, it picks the position on this particular point on our curve. And it's the same with the tangent. I mean, it doesn't work like that, but you can see it changes something and the normal. So you can pick defined points on our curve. So I've said something wrong here. So point 1 is here and 0 was here on the top. Just like that. And the same with the length. You can also use the length if you want to. So the distance. That's a very interesting node, very important node for people like Arundel or those geometry node hackers. Those big guys. So the next thing is the subdivide curve node. So I don't exactly know why this node exists, because we have the resample curve node, which has more properties, but I mean, it just subdivides your curve. Like here you have your points, and if you would subdivide it, it will get more points. So the next thing is the trim curve node. And this node is very cool because you can trim or cut your curve from the start or then from the end. And with this you can also make very cool effects. Like if you would use a plane and you would instance on those points, those curves, and then you can use that for nice effects, maybe. Looks interesting. And you can also make this, so if you want to have an object to follow a curve, you can also use the trim curve. It's a little bit of a hack, but if you would use a single value, so the same value for the start and for the end, then this would define a single point on our curve. And if you then would instance on this point with our friend the icosphere again, then we can move an object on our curve, like the sample curve node, but it does also work with the trim curve. The next thing is then the curve handle position. Doesn't do much, just outputs the position from your Bezier curve handles, so the left one and the right one, like that. And if you need it, maybe it's good. And then we have a very interesting thing, because then we have the curve parameter. And we have used this node a lot before, because this node outputs us the length of our curve. We will not get the length of then maybe 3 meters. We will get the length from a value of 0 at the bottom and 1 on the top. And it don't matter how long your curve is, it will always go from 0 to 1. And we can do interesting things with this, because we could use our curve to mesh node we've covered before, and we would use then our circle to use that as a profile curve, fill caps. And now we want to have our radius here on the bottom 1 and on the top 0. So it gets smaller and thinner and thinner. And we can do that by set curve radius. So this node will get later, but we need this here. So then we can use this here. And now we can see we change our curve radius by the curve parameter. And then, so as you can see here, this affects the whole thing. So the next thing is the curve tangent. And the curve tangent is, you have your, so I'll change that to an automatic. So the curve tangent is, you have here your curve and here your handle, and the curve tangent is the vector. If you want to instance on your curve a bunch of, what do we have here? A bunch of cones. So I will use a resample curve node so we have more points. But you want that the cones will follow your rotation of your curve. And for this you have the curve tangent, because you can use your curve tangent and plug that into the rotation, and you will lock that to one axis because it looks still crazy, but it does follow a little bit. So for that you will be using the align Euler to vector node, and now it does work. So plug that into the vector and then change this to Z, and now they will follow your curve like this. Getting a little bit messy here, but all you need for this are those two nodes, and then you have the rotation like this. I will delete this, and we will be moving on with the next node, which is the curve tilt node. So the tilt is basically the rotation of those handles around their own axis or local axis. And we can see it if I would, where is it? Tilt, Control T. If I would tilt it, you can see here the second control point, which is here the 1 because the spreadsheet begins with 0. If I would tilt it, you can see it. It outputs us those values. So the rotation of each handle around its own axis is the tilt. So a pretty basic node. The next thing is the endpoint selection. And this is also very interesting node, because with that you can, so that let me explain on an example. If we would use a delete geometry node and we would be using the endpoint selection, then we would say I want to have the first point selected, that is this one here at the end, and the first at the beginning, which is here. And this is the selection of those points. We have not a lot of points here, so we can relatively fast delete the whole thing like this. So if we would grab a curve, resample curve node, we would be having a lot more points, and with this you can then select different points here. Put a 1 at the start size, it will output a value of 1 at the first point, and if I would put a 1 at the end size, it would give me a value of 1 at the end point here. Also a very simple node. So the next thing is the handle type selection, and this just selects so if we want to have only the right selects or the left selected. So the handle type are those. This is a handle here. Those things in the edit mode that you can rotate then. So let me select our curve again so we can see it. These are handles, and we can select them here and all the different types of curves. So let me use the delete geometry again so we can see it here. So now we can specify a selection. Now we say geometry node that we want to have a value of 1 for every handle that is the handle type of a vector. But now we have not a single, oh, this is a vector. Yeah, so it works. So if we would set this handle type back to automatic, yes, you can see here, now it don't get selected. And if we would now change this to auto, now these two will get selected because they are set to auto. And I want to have this to be a vector. So now this will get deleted here. And this is the whole thing. The next node is Spline cyclic, and this node just outputs us. So cyclic is if the curve is completely closed. So we have an open curve here. So we have here an endpoint and here an endpoint. Cyclic is if this endpoint is connected to our start point and it is a full cycle. But this is not the case, and we can see it here in the viewer. It is not cyclic. If we were to connect those points, so where is it? Toggle cyclic. Then we have connected these 2 points, and now Spline cyclic gives us a value of 1 here. So the next point is the spline length, and this is just the length of our spline, nothing big, just the length of our spline here. So you can remember we can have multiple splines, so if I would duplicate this, we would be having 2 different lengths of splines. So this does look similar to the curve length, but if we now would compare these two, here we have 17, so this is the whole curve, but the spline is this one, and this one, because they are not connected. So these are 2 splines. And if we would add these two here, so 7.9 roughly added to 9.8, we would be getting 17.7. And as you can see here, the completely curve length is 7.7, and it works. So the next node is the spline resolution, and this just gives us the spline resolution. I think I don't have to explain that, how much points has our curve, right? Then we have the set curve radius. We've had that before. Here you can just, if we would use that example, you can just set your curve radius. So you don't see it if you don't use a curve to mesh node, because a curve can't have a profile. But if you would use then a curve to mesh node, then the set curve radius is visible. Because if a curve is not a mesh, then it does only store the curve radius. And then if we would convert it then back to a mesh, then this will get activated and will get visible. The next thing is the set curve tilt, and we've had that before in the edit mode. The tilt is just the rotation from a curve handle around its own axis. And the set handle position, here you can specify a position for each handle, so right and left. So those are the handles, right and left. So I have to rush a little bit because I have on raw time, without cutting footage, I have 42 minutes am I speaking right now. So I have to rush a little bit, but I think those are basic stuff here on the bottom. Set handle type is just here. Let us take the curve. And you can see here, now all points are automated, and now they are all free. Now they are all vector, and we have to select them both. So you can select left or right, and if you hold down shift, you can select them both. And then you can change the handle type for all the nodes. So free is just that you have your handle type like in edit mode, and you don't override it like this. Nice. Third, last thing is the set spline cyclic, and we've had the cyclic before. It's just that it connects the splines together like this. So this is not a cyclic spline because it starts here and then it ends nowhere. Cyclic is when those start and end are connected. And if we would use this on our curve here and set it to cyclic, we can see it connects the curve, and then it is cyclic. Then we have the set spline resolution. Let's try out this. So here we can define once again the resolution of the curve. You have a ton of options to manipulate the resolution of your curve. And then we have the set spline type. And here you have, so in the edit mode it's also available. You have here right click, set spline type, poly. Then you have Bezier or NURBS. And you will have the same thing here, set spline type, poly, NURBS or Bezier, like this. And you can use that on whatever you want. And these were all the manipulation nodes. I hope everybody understood that. I think the most things are very, very useful. My favorite is the fill curve or fillet curve node, and a resample curve node is very important, and the curve parameter. Those are the most important things that you would, and the curve to mesh node is also very important. Those are the things you have to remember. So the most things here on the top, from the half on the top, those are the most important things. And then the rest is just for if you want to have specific informations that you see here on the spreadsheet, or you want to change those specific informations. Thanks to those people that are still watching this tutorial. This is now a relatively large tutorial, but it's also a very large portion of notes here in this submenu. And I hope you are satisfied with my explanation. And thank you all for watching. So remember, if you want to have free materials or you want to have nice materials, you can just check out my Gumroad. Or if you want to have other materials in there, or if you have recommendations for this, you can also leave feedback in the comments. And if you want to have specific notes or other things, other submenus explained, you can also leave me a comment down below. And then I think I would end this tutorial. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you. See you later.